Hey everyone, hope everyone is doing well this evening. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. I'm Eve Engler, coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. Hope everyone is doing well. We have a special guest this evening who has some time restrictions, so I'm going to get right to some developments in Canadian foreign policy. There was a report released a couple of days ago about how the five Canadian banks, big banks, are all in the top 20 funders of oil and gas globally, with RBC being the number one financier of fossil fuel development around the world. We should be proud. One of our banks is a leading force in financing the destruction of potentially destruction of civilization, and obviously a climate crisis that's already greatly impacting many people, particularly those who are little responsible for global greenhouse gas emissions. Also, there was a report that came out saying that Canada's greenhouse gas emissions rose by 1.8% in 2021. Last week, we talked a little bit about the Liberal MP in London who talked about Paul Kagame went to Kigali for the 29th anniversary of the Rwandan genocide, and talked about Paul Kagame's comment about the importance of kindness. The couple of days ago, Paul Kagame kind of upped the ante in the war in Eastern Congo, where he said that basically because of the Berlin Conference, where European powers divided Africa, that part of Congolese territory should be Rwandan, which is setting the stage for actually trying to formally annex territory and clearly moving one step further towards an actual full-scale war between Rwanda and Congo, beyond their support for the M23 rebels that have displaced 800,000 people over the past year. And so Canada has provided all kinds of support. I won't get into that right now. Elsewhere in East Africa, the people, I'm sure people have seen over the last couple of days, there's been all kinds of fighting in Sudan, in Khartoum specifically, and between the rapid support forces and the military. And I definitely not very far from knowledgeable about the internal politics of Sudan right now. I read a long piece in New Left Review today that was kind of interesting, some of the political background to it. But I thought, and I know there's people who are saying that the military is very much backed by the CIA and the Egyptians. I really don't know enough to know one way or another, but I thought I would just go into a little bit of history of Canada-Sudan that is not necessarily not very widely known. First of all, back in 1884, 385 Canadians were dispatched to help the British maintain control of Khartoum. Khartoum was under siege, ended up being for like 9 months by so-called Mahadist forces, basically indigenous forces. The British General Gordon was under siege, and there were desire to going up the Nile was very difficult. Like 800 kilometers, a very difficult transport of personnel and weaponry and food, even for that matter, up the Nile. And so Canadians who had been involved in the Red River expedition in 1870, they recruited a whole bunch of them and others to do this, to help in transporting personnel and equipment up the Nile. Ultimately, it was unsuccessful. The Sudanese won, took control of Khartoum. About a decade later, it was a Canadian Montrealer, Royal Military College trained Percy Gerard, who would oversee the building of two very hard to build rail lines from southern Egypt to Khartoum that would be absolutely decisive in helping the British conquer Khartoum in 1896. And in that process of conquering Khartoum in 1896, the final battle, the British killed 11,000 and wounded 16,000, where there was 48 British or Egyptian, whereas 48 British or Egyptian soldiers died. So it was a massacre, a horrible, horrible massacre. And Gerard played this very important role in that as an engineer trained at the Royal Military College. And that was what Royal Military College was set up in Kingston, Ontario in 1876, in large part to do, was, as one historian put it, military historian put it, to train proper white gentlemen to be officers of British imperialism. And Gerard would become, Winston Churchill would talk about him. He was just incredibly widely celebrated in Canada at the time. He was on a list of like the top 10 most important Canadians. He would go on to be the colonial governor of northern Nigeria and then Kenya, right? So he would be British colonial governor in both of those places, in large part because his role in building rail lines to facilitate British imperialism, specifically in Sudan. In 1930, Canadian Trade Commissioner Office in Egypt was responsible for Sudan. A company like Bata Shoes, a Toronto-based company, was operating during the colonial period in Sudan. More recently, in the late 90s, when the Americans bombed the Al-Shifa pharmaceutical facility in August of 1998, the Canadian government, Lloyd Axworthy, the great, the liberal, the far left end of official Canadian foreign policy, he justified what Americans did, saying, quote, "When you come into this very murky and very dangerous area of dealing with terrorism, nations have a right to defend themselves." And the Washington's claim was that they were producing deadly nerve agent VX at this facility. They weren't. They were mostly producing the is it called chlorinine, or for the bug disease? I'm forgetting that kills hundreds and hundreds of thousands of malaria. And their estimates led to, they destroyed the production in Sudan. Estimates suggest thousands and thousands died. Some people died directly in the American bombing, but thousands and thousands died because they couldn't get malaria drugs. So the Canadian government backed Americans there in Sudan, and now simultaneously, and they basically blame the Americans were blaming claim the Sudanese were involved in terrorism, blowing up U.S. facilities, embassy. Now, concurrently, at the same time, there was Canadian mining company or oil company, Talisman, Calgary-based company, that was making lots of profits in southern Sudan and was accused of basically helping the government in Khartoum in their violent repression in the civil war in the south. So on one hand, we were saying that the government Khartoum was terrorist associated government, and then when it came to the Canadian mining companies making money, we were sort of, okay, that's all okay. That the whole Talisman question led to a big controversy, and the government did everything it could to not bring in restrictions against Talisman, and defended them even when they were brought to a different tribunal. So there's a bit of a Canadian background. Canada's first military deployment in 1884, first international military deployment in 1884, was to Sudan. In other news on Canadian foreign policy, Jacobin published a story titled "The Trudeau Liberals Can't Stop Themselves from Selling Arms to Anti-Democratic Gulf States." And it just goes through some of the arms sales to the different monarchies, specifically in Qatar, and the development minister Sajjan's trip to Qatar during the World Cup and pushing arms sales there. Very good story on a spring magazine published titled Against Democracy, A Brief History of CSIS. And that story is very important in the context of these allegations of Chinese interference and provides some context of just how much lying CSIS has done against environmentalists, against Muslims, heavily against unions, working class organizers, and it makes it very clear that we shouldn't be just trusting a CSIS in their the recent leaks. Mondoweiss published a very good background on B'nai B'rith titled Tracking the Malignant Racism of B'nai B'rith Canada. And it just goes through the history. So Stephen Ellis wrote this, and he's been working on a very deep dive into B'nai B'rith's background. And this story goes over some of what he's come up with in research. And so I definitely invite people to check out this article, but this article is particularly relevant today because today B'nai B'rith did their audit of anti-Semitic incidents in Canada for the last year. They released that today on Parliament Hill, and really scandalously, NDP MP in somewhere in Vancouver, I'm not sure if it's New West or somewhere in the greater the Lower Mainland, Alistair McGregor joined B'nai B'rith in releasing this alongside Anthony Housefather and Melissa Lantzman, two of the most hardline Zionists in the House of Commons, maybe the two most, and so you have this NDP MP showing up to what is clearly, I mean, if B'nai B'rith's not an anti-Palestinian hate group, I don't know what could be, and as the story in Mondoweiss points out, shows this whole deep history in stoking Islamophobia, and yet you have NDP MPs continuing to do events with the organization. It's really quite despicable. Also today, Jagmeet Singh put forward he's pushing a debate in the House of Commons around racism or acts of hate against mosques and against the Shul here in Montreal. And it's not clear to me, as I mentioned in the last episode of the one before, with the attacks against Alaska Mosque, Singh announced that he was going to put forward a resolution to see what Canada could do to address the question. It's not clear to me if this question about hate attacks against mosques and synagogues is actually a replacement for that. So while there was lots of attention on what Israel was doing, Singh makes this announcement. Now, I think it's not clear. I think this has now been morphed into this something quite different about hate crimes in Canada. And it's also, I should say, it's also a little disturbing. It's probably not connected, but it may be. It's a little disturbing that Singh would do this on the day that B'nai B'rith is releasing its audit, and it, kind of reinforcing B'nai B'rith stuff. And let's be very clear: a big chunk of B'nai B'rith's audit of incidents of anti-Semitism in Canada are really just acts of anti-apartheid internationalism, right? A big chunk of their claims are just pro-Palestinian activism. Actually, in 2014, when I was in Toronto, there was one I biked along, and people carrying Israeli flags, and I said things like "kill more Palestinian children" during the horrible destruction in Gaza. I said things like "kill more Palestinian children" to the pro-Israel activists, and I'm pretty sure that the incident of me doing that appeared in the next year. One of the incidents appeared in the next year B'nai B'rith audit, just to give you a sense of how like ridiculous some of the stuff they claim is. There's a good story on Canadian Dimension titled, "Is AMLO's Resource Nationalism Raising the Odds of a Coup?" that looks at Canada's role in Mexico and opposing the resource nationalism in Mexico. And the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute is doing a talk in a couple of days on this question with the author of that Canadian Dimension article. Also, the Council Canadians, and signed by 24 other organizations, a couple of days ago, called on the federal government to stop its effort to have Mexico drop its decree on the phase out of imports of GMO corn and a ban on the use of glyphosate. So the Canadian government is pushing this sort of this industrial agro model on the Mexican government that seems to be resisting to a certain extent. I don't know much about it, but this webinar should get into it a bit more in a couple of days. The Canadian Foreign Policy Institute on the 20th, I believe. The World Socialist website has a story titled, "Far-Right Ukrainian Canadian Congress Urges Trudeau Government to Censor Anti-War Meetings and Activists." In the story, it cites them naming me as somebody who appears on RT, who has appeared on RT, and so I therefore should be censored, I guess. Unfortunately, on Saturday, the Saint-Pierre, a usually union and a community group friendly space here in Montreal, actually canceled the room for an event that myself and a couple others were supposed to speak at on the war in Ukraine, and they initially said it was because I was pro-Russian, and then that was the informal reason given initially. Then in their formal statement, they said that they brought in this pro-Russian, they didn't name names, and they said that they were worried about a counter protest. We actually held a counter protest at the time. About 15 people showed up to criticize this canceling the room booking for this event. So just a sign of the climate that we're in. And as I should say, that the story about the Ukrainian Canadian Congress is just how much lobbying they've been doing on a push to the federal government to suppress discussion. It's not clear exactly what if they're calling for like a formal ban. It's not clear exactly what they're expecting the federal government to do. But clearly the climate that they are creating and playing off of is leading to something like the Saint-Pierre here in Montreal to actually to ban an event. The federal government announced a $59 million worth of assault rifles and machine guns and some ammunition to the Ukrainian military, going to be sourced by Colt Canada. Minister Anita Anand tweeted about the Canadian tanks have all arrived. And the Green Party, just today, Green Party co-leader, Jonathan Pedneau, is off to Ukraine. And he in his clip from the airport, he talks about how he's there to support the struggle for democracy. And I think it's actually the Green. It's probably partly a response, quite frankly, to Dimitris Lascaris' trip to Russia, and the Green Party wanting to very much not be associated with that. Now, the countering to this the political culture we live in is what the Brazilian president said a couple of days ago. So Lula said that the US and other countries must stop supplying weapons and encouraging war. So here you have the president of Brazil basically saying that all the weapons that Canada is giving is encouraging war, and that he proposes a plan to have like-minded countries come together with an initiative to try to bring about a peace plan. Lula's position is way offside of the acceptable within the Canadian left. I mean, Heather McPherson, NDP Foreign Affairs critic, could not even have a conversation with Lula on Ukraine even if she spoke Portuguese, that conversation wouldn't, couldn't even really happen because she's so far off in a different terrain. Even the Green Party, same thing. Even the left NDP MPs and most of left Canadian media, to the extent there is left Canadian media, same thing. They couldn't say what Lula is saying, and of course Lula is sort of maybe the preeminent figure in the global left, really. And so it just shows you like how far down the NATO perspective Canada is, and how that isn't a perspective shared by most of humanity. So that's important development that should be referenced. Now, getting to our speaker, John Price, who is a main organizer with the Canada-China Focus, author of a very good book called Orienting Canada, Race, Empire, and the Transpacific. So I thought I'd invite John on to talk about the letter that the Canada-China Focus released around foreign interference, and some of the background, or so the backlash, should I say, to that. Before getting to that discussion, I want one thing. A couple little bits I wanted to get into on China developments. One is that the front page of the Le Devoir said that the donation to the Université de Montréal and the Trudeau Foundation, that's gotten tons and tons of attention, that Guy Saint-Jacques, who was a very hawkish former Canadian ambassador appointed by Harper, Guy Saint-Jacques on the front page of the Le Devoir says that the donation was actually raised to him back in 2013, and it was planned as a donation to the Université de Montréal to have an exchange program with China, just as the Chinese businessman who gave at the same time gave a donation to the University of Toronto. Now that very much undercuts the whole idea that it was about a donation to influence Trudeau via the Trudeau Foundation, the current Prime Minister via the foundation named after his father. So that's kind of an interesting development. The other bit I wanted to mention is that the National Post had a big editorial titled "Vassalizing the West. China wants to subjugate Canada and Trudeau isn't stopping it." And in this thing about how China's vassalizing the West, they said that TikTok, the app that the Americans, now probably Canadians pretty soon, are going to try, Chinese company that it's at the forefront of a, quote, cognitive warfare that China is waging against I guess 14-year-old Canadian teenagers. So I guess, John, thanks a lot for coming on. I know you got some difficult you got the time constraints, and you have some family affairs to deal with. So thanks a lot for making the time. The first question I just wanted to bring to you is just talk about the letter and to the former Governor General and the backlash.
Thanks very much, Yves. I hope you can hear me okay. It's an honor to be on your show, and I want to thank you for all the work that you've been doing. In terms of the open letter, we put together the open letter because we were concerned about the escalation of the rhetoric against People's Republic of China and the stigmatization, racism associated with what's been going on. I think that it hit the mark, and we received a fair amount of publicity that rolled off of the letter, and that in turn led to some right-wing papers, including the National Post, deciding to take us on. I'm not surprised by that. The open letter was designed to sort of bring people together, and we think at this particular time, it's really important to understand that the powers that be are really trying to use divide and rule tactics, trying to stigmatize one group against another. And we really wanted to inject a note of sanity in that discussion. It's not to say that people can't have criticisms of the People's Republic of China, not at all. It's totally normal that there be criticisms of other countries, and just as there are criticisms of Canada. So that's not the question, but the question is when we move from criticism and cross the line into demonization, that's where we begin to encounter severe problems. And there are many people that are really feeling targeted by what's been going on. And so we felt it important to sort of address that. And there's been a great response, like I say, publicity-wise, and also I think we've got about 1,100 people who have added their signatures to the open letter. So we're really pleased with that reaction, and there's lots more stuff, happening. But these are tricky times, and again, from my perspective, it's important that we don't lose sight of the fact that there's a lot of divide and rule stuff that's going on, and we have to raise our game and really bring people together to oppose war, the threats of nuclear war, and avoid the stigmatization of any particular group of people. At the same time as making sure that we criticize those who are responsible for outlandish exaggerations and the demonization of the People's Republic of China, and that's where recently. This parliamentary delegation to Taiwan is really, a disturbing development from my perspective.
Yeah, well, you want to talk a little bit further that. So people may know there's a Canadian parliamentary delegation that went to Taiwan. I think they've just returned. They were there for a few days. They met the president, met the foreign minister. Beforehand, they released a report kind of setting the stage for this delegation. Heather McPherson, NDP foreign critic, was quoted a number of places saying that they were going to Taiwan to learn and share around the whole question of foreign interference, because Taiwan has been subjected to more Chinese foreign interference than Canada, and so we had this sort of common battle. But yeah, can you kind of go further into the parliamentary delegation and the report if you've had a chance to look at that?
Yeah, I've had a chance to look at it, not as thoroughly as I'd like, but enough to get a sense of what's in there. And there's some things that are in there that are very, very disturbing. And the fact that Heather McPherson of the NDP has chimed in, both in terms of that report and in terms of the delegation to Taiwan. Again, it's really important that when we come to the question of Taiwan, we don't, allow divide and rule to take hold, in the sense that we can't sort of look at Taiwan as some sort of monolith. It's not. It's a very diverse society, and we can't allow the media in Canada that tries to portray Taiwan as being represented by the president, Tsai, as sort of the be-all and end-all of Taiwan. It's not. And so, again, it's important to not essentialize countries or groups of people. We have to understand the diversity that's at work. At the same time, and that's why this report is so disturbing, when they start to put forward things like that are in the report, that include things like make efforts. One of the things they raised in the report was that they were going to make efforts, and I'm quoting here, to join the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue and AUKUS Security Pact. Well, the NDP has never put that forward before, and here we have a parliamentary report that McPherson has signed off on, in which they're basically saying we're going to follow the Australian path. And this is not the Trudeau government, which you might expect that from. This is from the NDP, right? I was flabbergasted to see that this sort of stuff is just being adopted holus bolus. And so I think that we've got a real problem there. I think that within the NDP, there is a group that have adopted a program of demonization of China that unfortunately Jagmeet Singh and the federal NDP have bought into, and I think it's extremely dangerous because the things that are put forward in that parliamentary delegation, it's also things like we've got Michael Chong suggesting in preparation for the trip that they were going to make sure that Taiwan did not become like Ukraine. In other words, saying that equating Taiwan with Ukraine, which is a very, very dangerous type of statement to make, because it totally contradicts our relations with the People's Republic of China and the One China policy. They try to hedge that and they say, oh, yes, we still believe in the One China policy, but our One China policy is different than that of the People's Republic of China. Well, this is like, semantics that are very dangerous, warmongering, raise the stakes of nuclear war. The fact is that, there's going to be a lot of discussion about this over the next while as things escalate and we continue to hear this sort of narrative coming out of Michael Chong of the Conservative Party, but also out of the NDP, that Taiwan may become the next Ukraine. Well, the fact is that Taiwan is not at all like the Ukraine. Taiwan is not an independent country. There's a lot of people in Taiwan who do not want to become an independent country, despite all the hype about separatism and what the Democratic Progressive Party is putting forward as a separatist program. So that is, the fact is that Canada recognized Taiwan as a part of China right from the end of World War II on. And I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but this is my bailiwick as a historian of Canada's diplomatic relations, particularly in this period. We know, and I just went back to my notes to find the statements about this. And so we find that, for instance, in the official documents of the Canadian External Relations for 1950, there is a meeting of the heads of the division of Canadian External Relations. And this was the minute that was taken of those discussions. It says, the Canadian view is that in principle, we adhere to the Cairo Declaration, which promised the restoration of Formosa, also known as Taiwan, to the Chinese state. This promise was confirmed by the Potsdam Agreement, upon which the Japanese instrument of surrender was based and which was signed by Canada. The political wisdom of repudiating wartime undertakings is doubtful. Furthermore, the de facto administration of Formosa by the Chinese government has been acquiesced in by the Canadian government through acceptance of a note from the Chinese government in 1946, stating that Formosa was restored to Chinese sovereignty and that Formosans had regained their Chinese citizenship. So that was the point of view of external relations in 1950. And let me just note that this was a discussion that took place after the Korean War. So what happens after when the Korean War starts in June 1950 is the Americans intervene massively to blockade Taiwan and stop the Chinese forces from bringing and reuniting Taiwan with the Chinese mainland. And so, that's the origin of U.S. commitments, right, in that particular area. They said they were, quote unquote, neutralizing Taiwan. In fact, it was a direct interference and a repudiation of the Cairo Agreement. And that caused a huge diplomatic stir because, in fact, the United Kingdom didn't agree with that position. So that's what was happening in 1950. So as we go through this process of talking about Taiwan, it's important to remember what the facts actually were and where the Canadian government stood. And all the stuff that's being put forward by this parliamentary delegation in the report is hogwash in terms of the truth and the actual position of the Canadian government at the time.
That's I think that's very important history to get back out there in the public domain in the coming days, if because I think that it's important to push back against this. So for people who want to look into it, the report was put out by the Special Committee on the Canada People's Republic of China relationship. So that you can find that on Google and read it and whatnot, which clearly does chip away at the one China policy. Now, maybe at a bit more of a macro level, John Mersheimer has put forward the notion or the idea that China is rising economically. Obviously, that's quite clear, and that basically time is on China's side. And that the U.S., if there's going to be a war, the U.S. would do better to have the war sooner rather than later, because China is sort of, drawing more of the region close because of its economic might. U.S. economic power is declining, and so if there's going to be, and obviously the Chinese military is also, they're increasing their military spending as their economy gets bigger. Though their military spending is actually China's military spending is only the same proportion to GDP as Canada, about 1.3% of GDP, which is a not discussed enough point. But so, yeah, what is your sort of assessment of that kind of geopolitical, the big picture geopolitical? I mean, the Americans, China, in response to the president, the U.S., they encircled Taiwan. I don't know enough about military affairs to know if what they did was something particularly new or important, but they, tried to encircle Taiwan presumably to potentially blockade it. And then the Americans are now doing their live fire drills with the biggest one ever with the Filipino military after signing some more bases with the military there. So to me, this delegation and this report, it's all feeding into this sort of U.S. kind of push towards hyping tension, hyping conflict, hyping, I guess, separatism within Taiwan. Yeah, what are your thoughts sort of on that kind of big picture where this may go?
Yeah, I think that I think the People's Republic of China, the government of the People's Republic of China, is playing the long game. I think that they're avoiding being provoked. I think that they have, really been quite patient in regards to what's been happening in Ukraine and the provocations that have been associated with that. I think that they are very cognizant of what's going on in the world, including the fact that the U.S. is actually on the defensive. That, I don't think they overestimate, and I think they have a pretty good grasp of their own economic issues. It's true that they've become a very important economic power, but that's not to say they're not without problems. And so I think the position is that they would like to see, the world continue. They've been able to use the structures in such a way as to develop their economy. And there's both positive and negative points associated with that. No doubt the U.S. is provoking things, and you break that down. Again, we can't be essentialist about it. There's different divisions inside the United States as well. Not everybody is pushing for war. There's a fairly outspoken group of people that are saying this is craziness. So I think there is provocations, and the military has been given the go-ahead to really push forward on so many fronts, which is extremely dangerous. But I'm also fairly optimistic that the opposition in the United States to what's been going on is building. And so I think time is on our side, so to speak. And when I say our side, I mean the forces for peace and for avoiding a nuclear holocaust. I think that, the more we can do to, to continue to counter the warmongering, bring people together as much as possible, and sort of articulate a sane way to deal with the issues that are in front of us, and particularly in terms of climate change. We're not going to go anywhere in the world if we don't have China on side in terms of climate change. And so, I mean, that's like it's a no-brainer. And so, in terms of the geopolitical stuff, yes, the U.S. is provoking the situation. I'm very concerned about their aggressive attitude in the Asia Pacific. And I've continued and will continue to write and speak out against that. At the same time, not losing hope for us to be able to bring people together and avoid, the terrible outcome of an actual war that would involve both China and the United States, not to mention Canada.
And that's what Canada China Focus is in large part about.
Yeah, we've tried to do work on this, but we're also engaged. Like I said, the main thing we're concerned about is the essentializing communities, stigmatizing certain communities. One of the things we're trying to do is work with organizations of Chinese Canadian professors across the country. Chinese Canadian researchers, scientists are being targeted by CSIS. They're coming under scrutiny, and there's a lot of fear. And so we really are working to try and counteract that, to make sure that people, and it's not just Chinese Canadian researchers or scientists, it's also anybody now who has had ties with researchers in China has become a potential target of CSIS. And so that is, people are realizing that this is crazy stuff. And so I think that there's lots of work that we're trying to do in terms of anti-racism work, countering the stigmatization and pointing out the dangers of this, not only to the world and because of the geopolitical situation, but also in terms of what's happening inside Canada and the racisms that is being directed at racialized communities. And so one of the other projects that Canada China Focus is sponsoring is we're putting out a new booklet to mark the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was passed in 1923. July 1st, it was put into play. It was actually implemented. It was known as National Humiliation Day within Chinese Canadian communities across Canada. So we're putting out a new publication to mark that and to show that what happened in 1923 was not simply something that occurred and happened to Chinese Canadian communities, but it was part of a white backlash that occurred around 1920 and continued throughout that period, that backlash that targeted not only Chinese Canadians, but also other racialized communities and Indigenous people. And so the Exclusion Act was just one aspect of this offensive against Indigenous, Black, and other racialized communities. And we see that there are some parallels to what's happening today. We do see a bit of a white backlash that's taking place. White nationalism is on the rise. And so we think it's important to point out these parallels and to develop our work in terms of, bringing people together to oppose the racism and stigmatization that's going on today.
So I know you have some time constraints. I don't know if you have opportunity to take any questions from.
Sure, I have a few minutes to take a few questions if we want to do that now.
So yeah, if there's.
I have a question, Eve.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you,
You're in
John.
charge.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. You just mentioned that you're seeing sort of a growing movement or something in Canada. People are saying this is crazy in terms of our, how we're behaving towards China and perhaps others. But I'm wondering, where do you see that? So I'm currently living in the US and I'm active in the anti-war movement, and I just don't really see it. So I'm wondering where you see that growth, what communities?
Well, we see it in terms of the people that have signed the open letter, right? That was, people. For one thing, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, the British Columbia office, helped us promote the open letter. And so we're seeing, and we think that's a really important support, and we build on that. If you look at the list of signatures, unfortunately, we've left it up to individuals whether they want to publicly identify themselves or not. But we go through the list of individuals, and there's like hundreds of people from universities across the country who have signed on to this open letter. I was just, in touch with Greg Keeley, who's a well-known guy who's written on national security issues, Order of Canada. I was in touch with him because I'm doing some research and just recently read his book and asked him where I could get a document. And I also asked him about the open letter. And he said, I totally agree with the open letter, and I would have signed it. He hadn't realized it was still open for signature. So I asked him to add a signature, which he did. So people are ready to stand on this issue, but it's very complicated. It takes time for people to really understand what is unfolding in front of them. And we also, and I think it's a note of caution that we have to take into account, is that these are issues that affect communities, and the Chinese, there's not a single Chinese Canadian community in Canada. There's many, many Chinese Canadian communities. There's a Taiwanese Canadian community. There's a Hong Kong Canadian community. There's and some people aren't even attached to any of these communities. They're just, but the point is that fear is stalking these communities. And so people are hesitant to barge in there, and that's a healthy attitude. We shouldn't barge in and sort of, think that we know it all. We have to find out what's going on. We have to investigate, and we have to intervene appropriately. So I think with our open letter, it was not just me. It was it was an open letter that was really the product of consultations amongst the 9 authors, which included people of Chinese Canadian and as well as Japanese Canadian origin. And so, it sort of represented that sort of, informed view that was, had some currency. It had, it resonated with many people. And I think the more of that type of thing we're able to do, the more successful we'll be in terms of rolling back this program of demonization and this absolutely crazy foreign policy that Canada has embarked on that is totally integrating us into the national security apparatus of the United States. So I'm optimistic, but it's not to say that it's not easy, that it's easy. It's not. It's hard work.
I don't see any other hands up. So if I could ask a second question, which is, there was a poll recently done. I don't know if it was Pew or what, that actually a Pew poll that came out showed, since they last did this poll, that people's attitudes in the US are much more negative towards China and see it much more as a threat than they did previously. And I'm just wondering what you're seeing in Canadian public opinion polls. And also, what are you seeing in the Canadian media? Are you seeing any questioning voices in mainstream?
Well, exactly. When we put out the open letter, we did get a lot of media attention, and very positive media attention. And that's what caused the backlash, right? So I think that, we made some inroads. We gained a toehold in the discussion, but it's just a start. But I think that people are, when all this stuff with TikTok, as Eve was saying, it's 14-year-olds are all of a sudden the victims supposedly of the Chinese government through TikTok. It's just ridiculous. And people are starting to say, what's going on here? And so I think it gives us a basis to move forward. But listen, it's the media. There's basically been a blackout. All we've gotten is the propaganda about that's basically following the United States foreign policy line. So not easy, but I'm optimistic.
Okay, we have 2 people with questions. We have Erwin and then Yuri. Go ahead, Erwin. Are you able to unmute? Eve, do you have to unmute, Erwin? Yeah. Go ahead, Erwin.
Thanks, John. I just want to pick up on your comment about Taiwan and the Canadian delegation, and I appreciate your words about the NDP's policies, or lack of policies, but the voices how do we show solidarity with the complexity of Taiwan community in Canada, while also not getting caught up into the xenophobia? So I guess you probably understand my question. I'm just trying to figure out how do we do community organizing with the Taiwanese community here without falling prey to that kind of larger war hawk approach?
Yeah, thanks for the question. You know, I don't have the solutions for that. It's very polarized within communities. We have to be gentle. We have to be realize that there's a lot of fear. I think we have to just find ways of bringing different people together. It's going to be difficult to bring together extremes, but there are people that are, in the middle, so to speak, that can have a discussion. And I think that's what we have to move towards, is having those discussions and trying to create a positive and safe space for difficult discussions to take place. And the more we're able to do that, the more we're going to, develop a position that is both takes into account, the geopolitical situation worldwide, but also local situations. And so no magic solutions, just continuing to really carefully work to try and create safe spaces to allow conversation to take place on these difficult issues.
Okay, Yuri, go ahead.
But I'm going to add something to that. Like, I think that holds within communities, but I don't think that should actually hold with regards to the NDP, for instance, right? Like, I think that when Emmanuel Macron, the French president, is saying that Europe shouldn't become a vassal of the US and shouldn't get involved in the US's effort to stoke tensions around China, I think we should be like, I get that there's dynamics within Taiwanese community, Hong Kong community, Chinese community, different generations, whatever. But when it comes to, the conservatives, the NDP, or the liberals for that matter, I think we should be quite forceful with our criticisms, right? And I think that, like, Heather McPherson should be very embarrassed by the fact that the French president is saying a way, way more reasonable position than she is on the question of Taiwan. And I think we need to, if the NDP doesn't feel that, like, kind of hard line from below criticism, they're just going to succumb to the media, right? Why wouldn't they?
I don't disagree with you, but I think we have to criticize the policies and not so much the people. Because we don't know, who's really responsible. I mean, of course, she's the foreign affairs critic, so she of course she should be criticized. But it's not that. It's, why is this policy on the part of the NDP? How has this come into being, right? That's what has to be gotten at. I mean, it wasn't ever debated within the NDP as a party. It's sort of come in through the parliamentary caucus and within the NDP and amongst the MPs. So how has that happened? We have to sort of look at why that is happening and go after the policy and be careful about individuals, because we don't know really exactly how that policy came into being. And so there may be people who are very sensitive to that and are open to the criticism. But you know how it is within caucuses. You break caucus solidarity and you're out. So, a forceful criticism of the policy, yes. Careful about how we deal with individuals. I'm sorry. I have to run. Sorry, I have a very important personal errand that I have to take care of, and I really appreciate the time. And I wish I had more time. Maybe we'll do it again in the near future. We'll have some more time for questions, discussion. So.
Thanks a lot, John. And
my pleasure.
Thanks. Take care.
Take care.
And if anyone else has a question or comment, obviously not for John, but for me or for others, go ahead. We're almost at our time.
Yuri and then Joan. Yuri, can you unmute, or can Eve unmute you?
Can you Yuri, can you do your hand again?
Yeah, all good.
Maybe that will put you up to the top of the list. I don't know why I don't see either of you.
Okay.
Go ahead. You have it. Somehow you were unable to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Or-
Well, I had a question for John, but it was about Taiwan. But I'm gonna skip that question. And I just wanted to ask Eve, did you get a chance to see this article by The Breach on the on the whole backlash and what to do with the whole with the rise of xenophobia and so forth? I had some issues with the article regarding I had some issues with the article, but I just wanted to know if if you had a chance to read it and what's your response.
I read it. I thought it was a pretty good article, but I didn't read it that closely, so I don't know. Yeah, for sure. But what was your criticism?
Yuri, you're muted. Did you mute yourself?
Yeah, well, I think one issue I had with the article was I checked the organization that they were talking about called Friends of Hong Kong Vancouver, and when I was looking at their Facebook page, they were sort of recycling a lot of junk stuff on China and sort of propping up warmongers like Terry Gladvin, I think, of the National Post. And they didn't explicitly, endorse a lot of the sort of, stuff about, is there a genocide going on with the Uyghurs? But they were sort of giving a lot of legitimacy to claims of human rights abuse in Xinjiang, which I don't believe, and I sort of push back as part of the whole pivot to Asia. So yeah, those were just my 2 cents on it.
Yeah.
Okay, Joan, go ahead. Can you unmute yourself?
Am I unmuted? I think so.
Yeah, yes, you are.
Okay. Well, I remember when I for years I used to go to the UN. I don't know, about 25 years. And at every one of the conferences, Taiwan was there lobbying continually and making sure there was lots of food to pass around. They were always there. And what they're doing is in violation of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. It said provocation of war is prohibited under Article 20. And that, they should not be allowed to go around promoting war at the UN. And I was wondering if he had, first of all, if it's still possible to sign, and if so, how, and if he sends it on to the Secretary General of the United Nations. His letter.
The letter is I think it's on the foreignpolicy.ca website, the Canadian Foreign Policy website, and it's on the Canada China Focus website. If somebody could put it into the chat, people can sign it still. But it's not to the UN. It's to the Governor General, or to the special former Governor General, who's a special rapporteur on foreign interference, and it's pushing back against the foreign interference sort of brouhaha, and specifically how that's focused on China.
Well, what I was thinking, I didn't mean, I know that's the purpose of this letter, but once he gets all the signatures, he should send it on to the UN to show that there are many people in Canada that are opposed to the position that the government is taking.
Okay. Now, Simri has a question, Eve, or Kim, I'm sorry, Simri. Go ahead, unmute, please. You can't unmute. Can you unmute her, Eve?
Here we go. Yeah, now it said the host would like you to. They said you can't anyway. I just want to point out there's a real pattern here that always seems to happen when there's this type of discussion. Like there is this or that country where, the US or some other global power is preparing to go to war. So they come up with their rationale for the war. And when people are discussing this, the first thing that they do is fixate on the rationale. In this case, the rationale is the fact that Taiwan is a province, well, not a province, but Taiwan wants perhaps independence. So they focus on that as though they're saving Taiwan. Or in Afghanistan, they were saving women, right, who were enslaved. Or in Ukraine, they're saving Ukrainians, or whatever it is they're doing. But people fixate on that rationale, that false, whatever, even if it's true, saying, ergo, if this is true, if it really is that Taiwan wants to separate, then it's okay if we go to war and kill everybody in China and send down bombers and spend billions of dollars and go there and smash their infrastructure because we don't like their policy. I mean, why doesn't anyone say war is not acceptable? That is what World Beyond War says, that war is just not acceptable. It's like murder. It is murder. Okay, so if you take the idea that murder is unacceptable, then you would say, whatever someone's rationale is, it's wrong to commit murder. Okay, it's not an acceptable reaction no matter what your circumstances. So if you take that, then you just say that war is not acceptable, then you'd have to find other ways. If they really didn't like all of a sudden China's policies, why don't they send diplomats to China and try to negotiate something with China? Why do they even really care about Taiwan? Come on. So I get very frustrated with the whole narrative and all these people discussing, well, what about Taiwan? Do they really want to separate? Well, the people are divided. Well, some of them do, as if we could all decide together and come to the conclusion that Taiwan really is unhappy and wants to separate, that it's okay to go in and bomb China. It's not.
Well, I think that this gets to Anita Anand today posted, the defense minister posted about there's a defense review that goes on until the end of the month. And then there were a bunch of former military, the Canadian Conference of Defense Associations Institute released a letter today basically saying Canada has to massively increase its military spending. My response to Anita Anand's stuff was to say we should cut the military budget 10%, withdraw from NATO, withdraw from NORAD, cut the military budget 10% a year for the next 5 years. I mean, that's what you have to think of defunding the military, to just not even have that as the option, and to, instead of have if you're going to have any military, have it completely structured around the actual defense, not about, extending the American empire, but basically move towards, getting rid of the military, or whittling it down to as small as possible. So we don't have, literally, even if you have a government in place that wants to send naval ships to stoke tensions in the South China Sea, that they don't have the capacity to do that. So I think that's, has to be part of the bigger picture. But within that, of course, we have to deal with the here and now of where politics are at. And where politics are at is there is, a stoking of tension on this issue, and therefore, have to have some form of response to that, those measures. And I thought what John did in terms of talking about the history, and when we're talking about the External Affairs Department of 1950 or after World War II, we're not talking about these real left-wing guys. These are really pro-American empire, pro-British Empire people, but they were in agreement that Taiwan or Formosa was part of China, and I think that history becomes very important in response to is parliamentary delegation's report that's trying to whittle away, chip away at that one China policy, and not chip away the one China policy because they want to stoke the tensions that could lead us toward war, right? That's the actual objective. So that's always sort of the political dance of like what we might want as the long-term vision, and dealing with the here and now of what policy decisions are sort of before us. But unless there's any more comments or questions, we're after 7 o'clock. Thanks everyone for participating. Have a good evening. Same place, same time next week. Take care.
Bye.